Dogon drawings turned up as glyphs in those Egyptian words.
Laird Scranton's radical reinterpretation of Egyptian hieroglyphs came directly from his studies of Dogon cosmological symbols. Their priests use cosmological drawings, symbols they have used for thousands of years. While it is impossible to ask the ancient Egyptians to explain their beliefs, Dogon priests can explain their cosmology and how their symbols are written and pronounced.
The Dogon lay things out in such detail that it's like having the teacher's copy of the manual of the book you're studying, with the answers to the questions written down in the back. You can go to a Dogon priest, or you can go to the anthropological studies that were taken in relation to the Dogon priests, and they flat out tell you what their symbol means and what they're, what they're trying to talk about. The general pattern I could say is that Dogon cosmology tells us how a concept should be expressed, how the word should be pronounced, what multiple levels of meaning the word should be associated with, and what kind of a drawing it should be associated with. That predicts for us what we ought to find in Egypt. And so when I go to Egyptian studies, I look at the Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary or go to a book about Egyptian cosmology, sure enough, I find the same word expressing the same meanings, written with the same drawing or the same drawn character, and I say I've got a match.
How is it possible that the Dogon culture in present-day Mali is connected to the ancient Egyptians? What is the link?
The Dogon seem to have come out of a class of priests who had very specialized knowledge and who, for one reason or another, were not happy with the way things were going in Egypt and deliberately left. I would say that sounds like it's true. I can't prove it's true, but it doesn't contradict anything I know. The fact that there's a match between the Dogon drawing and the Egyptian glyph in the context of the same word, pronounced the same way, with carrying the same meanings, is just another level of validation that I'm on the right track, that these words really do correspond to each other.
Using this new interpretation of hieroglyphic, what can we learn about the ancient Egyptian view of sacred cosmology?
I had some concerns originally as I began writing some of the books about what right did I have to be revealing secrets that have been kept for 3,000 years. But when I realized that the cosmology is about science, it's about the creation of matter and things like that, and I realized how close our science is right now to being caught up with what the cosmology, the ancient cosmology, seemed to know, I realized that if anybody's going to get any benefit out of it at all, that it has to come out now. You can't wait any longer. We're only about 50 years away from discovering all the things that I found in the Dogon and Egyptian cosmology.
Is it possible the ancient Egyptian cosmology was more advanced than today's science?
I'd say there is information in the ancient cosmology that would be a benefit to the string theorists and to the modern cosmologists if they'd pay attention to it. I think the Dogon and the Egyptians explain to us how it is that a mere act of perception can cause the wave-like behavior of matter to turn into particles, which the scientists don't know. When you ask Stephen Hawking how many fundamental particles there are, he says more than 200. If you ask a Dogon priest, he says 266.
Science is on the verge of understanding things that ancient civilizations seemed to know long ago. How is this possible?
Very, very close, within a couple of 100 meters.
The excitement builds for the real destination of the expedition, the ancient site of Nabta Playa.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Here we have this bunch of huge megaliths that were dragged from God knows where and placed in a pattern, a sort of center point of the whole area. It's essential that we do not disturb the stones, we don't touch anything, we just look at them. Because the alignments are there and they've been there for thousands of years, undisturbed, and we can use them to date this place.
A group of archaeologists led by Fred Wendorf, called the Combined Prehistoric Expedition, by chance found some pottery shards at Nabta Playa. They thought that the megaliths were just outcrops of rock. And then they started to realize, well, these are setting on top of playa sediments, sediments that were built up during the Neolithic time. And so how did they get there? So they had to get there from man. These were man-made objects, these megaliths. One of the possible links to Egypt before the pharaohs is that Nabta Playa became climatically hyper-arid like it is today around 3800 BC. It has not been lived at or used since.
It has been assumed by historians that Egypt borrowed its complex society from Mesopotamia. However, it is now generally recognized that a process of social complexity is not diffused from one location to another, but rather develops locally.
(3400 BC is when you see pre-dynastic cultures building up on the Nile Valley, just 100 kilometers east of Nabta Playa. If that's the case, then a lot of the great dynastic Egyptian stuff we're all familiar with had some aspect of origin in the Nabta Playa people's cultural development.
Dr. Nicole Dueck is an Egyptologist who lectures at the British Museum and at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. By strange coincidence, she happened to be at Nabta Playa on the same day as our team.
From what I understand from her, she also believes that this could be the source of Egyptian civilization.
This is just amazing. I've wanted to come here since the first publications came out.
What are the odds of meeting on the same day?
None.
Exactly.
The coincidences for me are astonishing. I mean, last year, the same people, we went to Gilf Kebir and the Wenat. We spent 2 days roaming around Karkotal and looking at the graffiti and, all the bovids and the cattle and the people moving around with their animals. And it's the same dates as here.
These people had what today we would call a calendar. They used the position of the sun to mark the specific days of the year, and the main stations of the year, of course, are the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and the two equinoxes. No doubt, they tracked the sun through the year, and therefore they had a calendar.
This structure may not appear significant above ground. Looking beneath the surface reveals an enigma.
These complex structures are the most enigmatic remaining aspects of Nabta Playa. When they excavated the central one, the largest one, underneath the surface, down in the playa sediments, the playa sediments are about 10 feet deep, they found this megalithic sculpture. Some people call it the cow stone. It has perhaps a vague resemblance to a cow, but it also seems maybe to have an astronomical meaning because it's in this astronomical complex. And then underneath the sculpted stone, on the bedrock, underneath all the sediments that were laid down earlier, they found another sculpture, sculpted out of the living bedrock, sort of like the Sphinx is sculpted out of the bedrock.
The bedrock sculpture was carved and sediment filled it in over thousands of years. Then the cow stone was carved and placed there, and then sediment filled it in again. We are looking at 3 subsurface layers of sediment. This is a clue to the extreme age of Nabta Playa.
what makes all this far more exciting is that they also align to stars. And that's a totally different ball game here, because aligning to stars means that they track the seasons. The climatic conditions were very important to them. There was the beginning of the monsoons, and therefore the stars would be the signal to them that the monsoons had started. They would start migrating here, and they would arrive here when the water, the monsoons, the rainfalls had filled the lakes. It was essential that they get here when the lakes have water. It would have been a fatal mistake had they come here 20 or 30 days before the event. From the central complex radiates three series of lines, east, and a series of lines north. Mm-hmm. Right. According to Wendorf and the checkups by Brophy, we've got alignments to the rising of certain stars here and here.
A double alignment of blocks, 250 meters long, points to the brightest stars in the belt of Orion. The second line points to the rising position of Sirius. Another long line of stones aligns to the brightest star of the Big Dipper, which later Egyptians represented as a cow thigh or leg. The stelae face the circumpolar region of the heavens, which the pyramid text describe as a place where the stars never die.
They've got Orion's belt and Sirius. What's interesting is that they seem to be tracking them, not just aligning two, but they seem to be tracking them over the movement over a long period of time.
So they knew the stars moved, and they knew that the sun moved the same every year on an annual cycle. Maybe the whole ceremonial complex has something to do with the age of Gemini and transition to the age of Taurus.
The constellation of Taurus is represented by a bull. If we are talking about the transition to the age of Taurus, was the symbolism of cows in ancient Egypt connected to the nomadic cattle cults prevalent in the area?
So astronomy is telling us that there's a link. Now we need the anthropologists and the Egyptologists to find that link.
The problem is that most of these disciplines are so entrenched in their own little world that it's very difficult to move people one side or the other. And I mean, I don't know how it is in the United States, but in Britain, everyone is in his own little world, and people who deal with text won't talk to people who deal with sites in the same discipline.
It's becoming more than obvious now.
I think it is.
That there are
connections. Of course there are. And they're very, very important connections, because there are no other answers, for the moment anyway.